and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts. In this week's episode, we will be chatting to Dr. Philippa Whitford about wellbeing and the road to Holyrood 2026. Welcome to our guest, Philippa Whitford, one of our favourite guests. Often have her back in the studio.
And, thanks very much, Fiona.
There's so much going on just now in the world of politics. We thought, let's get somebody who's been involved, so has a perspective, but is also stepped out of it, so maybe has a slightly different perspective. Perhaps that's a good place to start, because you've just retired. We predicted that you would find yourself busier than ever. Has that turned out to be true?
Well, I've had a few other things going on, personal illness and family illness with my mum, so that has limited me. But yes, I'm out on the road, doing talks on Gaza, talks on the wellbeing economy, talks on Scotland, a European nation, a talk you've had before online. And so kind of a wee bit like a rerun of 2014 for me, kind of touring around and staying with activists and visiting different groups around Scotland. So it's kind of quite fun. And it's quite nice to be that sort of flexible, where you're doing your own thing. I'm not shuttling up and down to London every Monday morning. I mean, that's great to not have to do that.
The Holyrood 26 election is less than a year away, and it feels like already like nothing we've ever seen, because you've got the Reform UK element, you've got potentially a Corbyn element, you've got John Swinney's plans, which may be, not going down as well as he might have liked. I don't know. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I think I would agree with you that there's far more moving parts than we've had in the past with reform. I mean, I can't help but describe the threat of reform. There's absolutely nothing about reform from the corrupt Nigel Farage down that I find very acceptable. I find it quite frightening. And obviously, there's a lot of talk about him being the Prime Minister in 2029, which is absolutely terrifying. But equally, having Reform, maybe even as the main opposition party in Scotland, they would be quite disruptive. And I think that is a significant issue. Obviously, with Corbyn's party, there's a lot we don't know about it yet, obviously, including its name, including its exact approach to independence. Does it support independence? Does it allow the Scottish branch to make up its own mind, or does it support a referendum, but not necessarily independent? Until they kind of formalise themselves, we don't know exactly whereabouts, if you like, in the kind of parliamentary rainbow they stand. But I think there are so many people in Scotland with buyer's regret after voting Labour last year, and Labour's first year has been, I would say, a fairly unmitigated disaster. There will be people on the left of Labour, and Scotland is much more naturally on the left, who will be attracted to Corbyn's party if they get themselves organised for standing next year. So I think it's a much more unpredictable election, and that may impact on how some of the parties fight their campaigns. Whereas often it was vote SNP for a referendum, vote Tory to not have a referendum. The Tory leaflets round my way in Ayrshire were actually the same in 15, 16, 17, 19. I mean, it was really just having the same vote Tory to say no to a second referendum. Oddly enough, they didn't win, and yet that didn't seem to count as, well, actually a minority of people wanted to vote no for a referendum. So I think it's definitely a more unpredictable election than we've seen in the past. But it's a very critical election, I would say, for Scotland, particularly with the threat of Reform and Nigel Farage in Downing Street, possibly in just 4 years' time.
Just a horrifying prospect, isn't it? People who are swithering about independence, that might be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yes, although we thought that for Brexit, didn't we? And then we thought that for Boris Johnson. And
I was about to say that, Marlene. I think you always need shade and light. So I think it is important to highlight that the UK that exists now, and may well be the UK that will exist in 5 years' time, is nothing like the UK that people voted to stay in 2014. the entire landscape has changed. Dragged out of Europe, the shift to the right, and the fact that, in 2014, lots of the narrative was, if we only had a Labour government, nobody would want independence. Everything would be marvellous. And that chimera has turned to ashes. So, I think you need that, but you also need a vision of independence. How would being independent change people's lives? And I think that's where the discussion around well-being economics really comes into its own.
Do you think there's enough profile for that within the Scottish government? I mean, they say the words, but I never quite get the sense that this is a major part of their thinking.
Well, actually, it is a major part of their thinking. And many people don't know that in 2018, the Scottish government founded the Wellbeing Economy Governance Group with Iceland and New Zealand. Yeah. And that came out of their inclusive growth policy of 2017, which was, it was all right to talk about growth, but growth was all going to certain people and others were excluded. And the theory that came out of that was you needed a focus on increasing childcare, improving transport, and improving digital connectivity so that more people could share the benefits of growth. Since that, we've actually come much more to the realization that endless growth is just not tenable. We're either going to eat the planet or burn the planet. I mean, that's if you just constantly chase after growth. So it's much more about looking at sustainability, having an economy that is sustainable. And what the Scottish government did set up back then was the wellbeing framework. So it's in a lot of our policies. And what you see is a lot of Scottish policies are absolutely about wellbeing, whether it's the baby box, the Scottish child payment, free university, free personal care, free prescriptions. All of these things are about improving the well-being of everybody who lives in Scotland. But the problem is all of those are still in essence mitigation of an underlying economy that is based on profit, is based on exploitation of people, exploitation of the planet, based on austerity, which means more suffering for people. And therefore, you need independence to actually be able to change that underlying motor of the economy into one that serves people rather than people being sacrificed to the economy, which is kind of where we are now. The Scottish government's on a fixed budget. They've just made a huge announcement about money for affordable housing. That's absolutely critical to tackling poverty, but that means there's money they don't have somewhere else. They don't have significant borrowing powers, they can't have an overdraft, and therefore they're always in a position of moving money around instead of being able to say, actually, this year we're going to invest to get X, Y, and Z done, because that's going to save money and improve lives further down the line. And that's where you need independence. I would say the government don't talk about that phrase as much. My understanding is some leading members in the cabinet don't like the phrase wellbeing economy. You get people saying, the public don't understand what that means. Public knew absolutely nothing about COVID, but we took the time to explain it. And that's why I go around giving these talks, trying to unpack what we mean by the well-being economy. Yeah. So I hope that in the future and after the election next year, I hope that we'll have a Scottish government that does talk more about it. But between here and next May, I think it's vital to talk about it because it allows you to show the well-being policies that only exist in Scotland, nowhere else in the UK, but also to show this is what we need independence for. And this is how independence would improve your life and the life of your family.
Yeah. I think that's interesting hearing you say, maybe, Scottish government don't talk about it enough. Because I often think that, I knew from way back when, we joined in with those other countries to talk about a well-being society. But I was also aware that was very little ever sort of seemed to come out of it. I found it really exciting. Now, I know there's always the big problem that how do you get the media to pick that up and report it, put it on people's TV screens and talk about it, in a fair kind of way. But I still think that with that and other policies, somehow or other things that the government could be shouting from the rooftops is just a bit I don't know, a bit muted. I mean, I thought that about doing away with peak fares for the trains. Well, we've just got a leaflet through the door, although it's actually from ScotRail, not from ScotGov. And I think people have, SNP people and candidates have been out kind of, how it struck me was, you've just given commuters, folk with jobs who have to go in, you've just given them a pay rise.
Yep.
You've just given them more disposable income. So why not talk about it like that?
I mean, to be fair, I would imagine it's the same for Scottish Government as Holyrood as it was for us at Westminster. Team at Westminster would put out several press releases a day and they would just go nowhere. They just wouldn't cut through. And so that was the importance. I mean, people often say, oh, the SNP politicians shouldn't go on the BBC, shouldn't go on Question Time, shouldn't go on Politics Live. But actually, these programmes get into living rooms. And often debating on these shows is the only opportunity we get to speak to the public. On top of that is obviously through social media, and particularly, if we've spoken about something in Parliament, is then sharing that. But there's no question that independent supporters, the Scottish Government, always have to go round the media. So media, particularly in Scotland, is an absolute barrier. And it was very obvious during COVID, where BBC Wales would celebrate some achievement of the NHS in Wales. And almost the same narrative, where maybe even Scotland was outperforming, if it was covered at all, the headline would have a framing that was negative. And I've seen that over and over and over again, that either a good story isn't covered, or in some way the headline on it is framed to make it a disaster. So there's no question about that. But it is definitely the case that I don't think enough time and trouble was taken to talk about the wellbeing economy to the public over the last kind of 7 years since that became Scottish Government policy. But also then there's been a cooling on that even over the last couple of years with the Scottish Government, that I think there are people in the Cabinet who are not comfortable with that language, and therefore they talk about the individual policies. Now that's all well and good up to a point. The Scottish child payment is fantastic. Scotland's the only nation in the UK where child poverty is predicted to fall. As Professor Danny Dorling from Oxford pointed out, it's the biggest anti-poverty measure since the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, these are great things, but there's a majority of people in Scotland in families who don't get the Scottish child payment. Whereas when you talk about the whole wellbeing economy, from baby box, Best Start grants, free prescriptions, free dental checks, eye checks, whatever it is, affordable housing, no bedroom tax, the free personal care, then actually whether it's your kids, your young children getting kind of expanded childcare, or your teenager going to university without fees, or your mum getting free personal care, then actually most families interact with these wellbeing policies in some way. And so to me, it allows you to say, no, actually, it doesn't matter who you are. If you are this age to this age, if you have family from this age to this age, you are gaining from Scotland's unique wellbeing policies. And that's why I feel the package and approach is much stronger. But then it also shows you, we don't have a living pension. The UK pension's 29% of average earnings. In Europe, the range is usually about 70 to 90%. We can't change that. We can't set the real living wage, as opposed to the pretendy living wage, as we called it in Westminster, as the minimum. So, actually having powers over, setting that people must be paid fairly. Our taxpayers' money is used to support people who work but are not paid fairly. That's not actually supporting them. That's actually supporting a company who's exploiting their workers. The people in Scotland pay the highest standing charges for their electricity bills, and yet the north of Scotland is covered in windmills and pylons and is the coldest part of the UK. We have immense renewable energy resources, but without independence, we don't control them. So while there's all these people going, independence is irrelevant, it's the cost of living, it's housing, it's the NHS. Well, look at the impact on the NHS of Brexit, the social care staff that we've lost. You can't sort the NHS without sorting social care. So to me, that whole holistic approach to kind of, this is the kind of society we envisage, allows you to talk about the best you've done with devolution, what you could be doing if you had the full powers, including the ability to not have more than half of your tax take controlled by somebody else, as well as the ability to borrow to build the infrastructure you need, whether that new schools, new hospitals, dualling the A9, or broadbanding every house and business in Scotland. Those are things you can do when you actually have complete power over your economy, your government, your finances, your currency, etc.
Do you know, the SNP should get you to write their campaign material. That was brilliant.
That was it. It is brilliant. And, you know, one of the things that Fiona and I chat about ourselves, but also we hear other people saying something about along the same lines is more, especially given that we're in the run-up to Holyrood next year, Holyrood election, that we'd like to see ScotGov picking a few fights with people, you know, not being Mr. Nice Guy. And I do mean John Swinney, actually. I have a lot of respect for the man, you know, and he's an honourable kind of politician, but I'd just like him to pick a fight. Now, you have to choose your fights, right? So you choose one that, you know, there would be benefit from. I mean, the obvious one that always comes to our mind is energy. I mean, for some of the reasons that you've just outlined, you know. And in a way, even if you pick a fight and then, you know, you don't kind of win it, but you've actually got a lot of air and a lot of space on, you know, TV, media, whatever. And even if in the end it's, well, that can't happen because Westminster controls it, that, in a way, that's still a win, isn't it?
Energy by itself is almost the single biggest argument, you know, on its own for independence. Yeah. People don't realize that our generators, so like our wind farms, tidal, you know, whoever it is that's wanting to put electricity into the national grid, and I mean the UK grid, they pay 10 to 15 times the rate of a generator in the middle of England. And if it's a generator in the south of England, they actually get paid to put electricity in the grid. So our generation end is handicapped by that. Then you have at the other end, our consumers are paying more despite living in the coldest part of the UK. And when the issue of zonal pricing came up, which would have made Scotland electricity much cheaper and might have attracted energy-intensive businesses to the more rural parts of Scotland, to the periphery where we have offshore wind farms, to islands, but basically to the Highlands particularly, that gets ruled out. It doesn't even get serious consideration because, that would be unfair to ask people in England to be paying a bit more. Well, you've been asking people in Scotland to pay quite a lot more for years. Over 40% of households in Scotland are struggling with their energy bills in a place that has the oil, the gas, the wind, no shortage of wind and tidal potential, but we don't control those resources. So, you know, I think picking some of these things and unpacking them for the public, whether within the wellbeing economy narrative or on their own in specific leaflets or papers, certainly allows you to see, here's what we've done, but here's what we can't yet do. And that's why we need independence. And it's a thing that would make a difference to you and your family.
Yeah. Just to mention Danny Dorling earlier, Fiona and I were we went over to the Festival of Politics event where he was speaking. It was great, really, really enjoyed it. I was in the Conservative front bench, unfortunately, but there you go.
We got a better view.
We got a better view. I mean, it was really a good event. And of course, the Scottish Child Payment was mentioned. He talked about that quite a lot. But at one point towards the end, he was talking about how you make change and how you kind of bring that through in terms of social change. And two of the things he said was, well, but people have to care and they also have to be angry. It didn't mean the kind of anger that we're seeing on the streets with Farage's supporters. He's not talking about that. He's talking about the kind of anger, and of course the example he used was an Aaron Bevan, who was just angry at what had happened to his family in terms of health or lack of health measures. So that just really kind of struck a key with me, because in a way what you're talking about would be fantastic. The facts are all there. Do we care enough, and are we angry about it.
That's what I mean about, obviously the Barack Obama Hope campaign, and there were lots of people in 2014 saying, oh no, we only need a positive vision, we don't talk about negatives. But actually, you do need dark and light. You need to show, here are issues that make it worth getting up off your bahookie and going and changing something. Because if you don't say that, then why should we bother? And as you say, you have to care. And that involves caring about putting in the energy to make change for yourself and your family. Now, most people naturally do want to do that. They try to get a better job, or they try to get a more secure house, or whatever it is for the benefit of their family. So that's why I think that is quite a strong narrative. But you also have to care about the other people around you, in the sense of, I don't think most people in Scotland would be attracted to the idea of living in a posh gated community, getting in their car and driving through a completely dead town with people living in cardboard boxes. I think we're still quite communitarian in Scotland, and I think that we need to be reaching out to that. But the one of the key issues is also, in the end, it all comes back and lands in our lap. If you don't invest in children when they're babies, if you don't invest in the pregnant woman to start with, so that the baby has a decent chance right from day zero, if you don't invest in the house they live in, do they have enough to eat? Is the air clean around them? Is it safe to walk to school? Then you will be picking up the pieces for the rest of their lives. And I remember when I was at Westminster, I was vice chair of the Health and All Policies Group. And in 2016, when they did the big raft of welfare cuts, including the 2-child limit, benefit cap, all the rest of it. So we did an inquiry with the UK Faculty of Public Health, and there was a professor from Liverpool who came out with this figure that the UK loses 1,400 children before the age of 15 as a direct result of poverty and deprivation. Now, that's the size of a secondary school. Can you imagine if the roof of a secondary school was collapsing every year and killing that many children? Wouldn't we do something about it? And it's multifaceted. It's miscarriage, it's low birth weight, it's prematurity, fetal alcohol syndrome, house fires, road accidents, addiction, violence, suicide. All of these things that kill our young people are heavily associated with poverty and deprivation. And that's very much why the Early Years Collaborative involving Sir Harry Burns put such an emphasis on that beginning of life. Because if you spend the money there, they have a much better life, and you're not putting them in prison or picking up the pieces later on. And the thing is, the Scottish government gets that. To their credit, they get it. Westminster doesn't get it. And we now know that whether it's Tory or Labour, and certainly there's no chance with reform, there's nobody in Westminster who is going to recognise that you must invest in children for them to have a better life than we have necessarily had, but also so that they reach their full potential and contribute to our society, and indeed even contribute to our economy if that's your focus. But it's trying to get that recognition that you need to invest in children. And the Scottish government do try to do it. But as I say, if you don't control your budget, you're always trying to balance every year. So actually, you're doing things that are just a sticking plaster, where if you had full powers, you would fix the underlying problem. You wouldn't keep putting fresh tarpaulin on the roof. You would actually retile your roof.
Yeah. Two things that Danny Dorling said at that event that have stuck in my mind. And one was, I can't remember the percentage, but he quoted the percentage of babies in Oxfordshire who've never been washed in anything but cold water. Because if you can't heat your house, you're not going to wash your baby in hot water. I mean, that was just such an image. But the other thing that really struck me, he said already the Scottish child payment is starting to show a difference in the height of our children. The English child mortality figures are going up, where our children are getting taller because of decent nutrition. I mean, these are fantastic measures.
I mean, that's fantastic if there's research showing that already, because certainly over the last 15 years because of austerity, the height of children in the UK had gone down. Now, often Scottish children were shorter to start with. If you imagine some of the people that you would see across Scotland, particularly in some of our poorer parts of Glasgow and the Central Belt. So that's fantastic if you're already seeing that. But it's also, it's recognising this knitting together within a wellbeing approach of a whole lot of different policies. So even the Scottish Child Smile, which started in 2007, Wales copied the idea in 2011 when I was in Parliament. So up until last year, England did not have a national system of promoting good dental health in children. Indeed, it was reported that 40% of children in England couldn't get a dentist at all, because the way their contract works is it basically disincentivized preventive work. Rather than rewarding preventive work. And what we saw was, while we started with much poorer dental health in Scotland because of poverty and deprivation, you saw things like caries and so on really plummet in Glasgow, and good dental health starting to rise up to the rest of Scotland. And I remember going to an event when I was first at Westminster in the House of Lords, and it was about dental health, and I thought, I'll go along and fly the flag for Child Smile. There was a dentist there with a bag of teeth. She said, "This is a bag of the teeth I have removed from children today."
Oh,
it is the biggest cause of child admission to hospital is full dental clearance. And so she was just going on and on and on about Child Smile in Scotland. So I didn't need to say anything. But when you look at the fact that through the Scottish Child Payment, the Scottish Government will invest £20,000 in every young person in a low-income family up to the age of 16, that's a game changer. And along with things like the Best Start nutrition, the Best Start grants, the baby box, which helps out all young parents, you are really seeing that investment in, early learning and childcare, free school meals, because they will have a better chance to turn into successful adults if they are living in a decent house, having enough to eat, and living in an area where they feel safe to play outside and walk to school. All of that, and it's all these interlocking pieces. It's not just one. Scottish Child Payment's a big piece, but it's all of these different things that we have in Scotland. And that's why I think talking about the wellbeing economy is so vital, because you can hang all the policies on it and show these are all unique to Scotland and they all add up to improving the health and well-being of every Scottish citizen.
And they're all at risk as well if we get reform in.
Yeah, not just reform. I mean, I would suggest that if we had a Labour government in Scotland, how long do you think it'll be before Keir Starmer yanks on the leash and says, no, I'm sorry, you can't go on having these different kind of policies? Because that kind of divergence particularly came after 2007, when we had a different government in Scotland from in Westminster. So I would really worry that regardless of what Scottish Labour might aspire to do, they would actually be reined in, because clearly it's often used to cause aggravation south of the border. Why are we paying £10 an item for prescriptions when these Scots get it for nothing? So I don't think it's just reform. I think Labour would be a threat to that as well.
Yeah.
When you talk about all these individual policies and then wrapping them, as it were, within the well-being. So in a way, I was going to say it's not new, but I mean, it's something that's been done before. But actually, it does sound like that could be done again in the next few months to make it an effective measure. Although, if you say there are people in the cabinet who are not so keen on the word well-being, then maybe that wouldn't happen. But it would make much more sense to wrap it round in that and produce it as a package. I mean, almost like a jigsaw. You could do a really good wee, promo with bits of a jigsaw coming in, and then another bit, and then another bit, and then it produces a map of Scotland or something. At the moment, so far, what we've got is the First Minister's speech the other day when he talked about he was framing everything in terms of the right to decide. And that seems like a good move, because it seems to me if you're a politician, if you're going to put a campaign forward that you know already that there's a majority in favour of, because there is for that. Is something, I think it's something like 57% if you ask people. I mean, that's not to say that all of them will vote for independence, but it seems like a good start. So we're just wondering, do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And we saw Martin Geisler yesterday challenging Douglas Alexander on, we were constantly told at Westminster it's a voluntary union. And I mean, I asked prime ministers repeatedly at PMQs, if it's a voluntary union, explain how we leave. So what the paper does, it shows that there was this broad acceptance of the claim of right from 1989.
Yeah.
It quotes people like John Major, Margaret Thatcher, David Cameron, that Scots have the right to decide. Now, we believe that in Scotland, sovereignty lies with the people. And so I think it is a very good place to start, because even people who may not yet be convinced, or maybe are convinced they don't want independence, may feel, well, actually, we need to clarify this, because otherwise it's going round and round. For me, as I said earlier, I feel the landscape of the UK is utterly different from what people voted to stay in 2014, and therefore we should have the right to make that decision again. I think it is actually a good starting point, and the paper has quite a lot of quotes in it from politicians across the board, including people in the Better Together parties, the Smith Commission, etc. So I think that is a good place. We believe in the sovereignty of the Scottish people. Now, what I often say when I'm finishing my talks about independence, if we, those who already believe in independence, believe in the sovereignty of the Scottish people, we also have to accept there isn't a trick or a shortcut to this. You're not going to get this with 49% that somehow looks something different when you turn it into seats or whatever else. You actually have to have the support of the majority of Scots if you're going to change the constitution and become independent. To me, that is critical. And so people say, oh, we need to just spend even more years talking about process. Well, I find that boring. I think most people find it boring. It just is lots of people arguing with each other. We need to get back to focusing on the why and the vision. If we'd had 9 years in Westminster with a consistent majority of Scots at our back, we'd have had a much louder voice. Whereas if you're only looking at polls, it goes up a wee bit, then it goes down a wee bit, it flicks backwards and forwards, it's borderline. So the lawyers, the constitutional people, etc., can look at all the routes that can get us legally to independence, whether it's a referendum, whether it's a de facto referendum, whether it's the UN. I mean, frankly, personally, I don't care. I just want independence. But we can only start that new version of Scotland with the support of the Scottish people. So if we say we respect the sovereignty of the Scottish people, we have to actually respect the sovereignty of the Scottish people. And that's why I'm happy not to be at Westminster and be back on the road in town halls and church halls talking to people about the wellbeing economy, about Scotland, a European nation, about what we could do if we were independent. Because as Margot MacDonald said, it's our duty, every single person, not just politicians. I mean, the amount of grief as a politician you get on social media. Why haven't you delivered it? What are you going to do about it? Sorry, It's not my job. It wasn't my job. It's not John Swinney's job. It's all of our jobs. And if we did what Margot said, and every single Indy supporter put the energy into converting one other person, we'd already be home and dry. Whereas what we've had over the last 6 or 7 years is too much inward looking, too much arguing about process. Whereas I feel, and I often quoted this even years ago, you look at the fall of the Berlin Wall. I mean, my husband's German. In the end of the day, the people of East Germany and East Berlin just took it down because they decided they'd had enough. And that's what happens when you have the power of a population behind you. The unthinkable can happen. We were in Berlin literally a couple of months after the Berlin Wall came down. We had been in Germany a couple of months before the wall came down, and you wouldn't have imagined it was going to happen. So to me, the power lies with the people, And that's where we need to be putting more of our energy. But it doesn't need to be the same people. People who are good at looking at all the routes to independence legally can be working on that. People like me can just be out and about talking to ordinary folk and saying, why don't you think about this? Why don't you imagine your family, your business, your home, your village in an independent Scotland, and how it would be different and how it would be better?
Yeah, that just sounds brilliant. And I mean, we've had a couple of chats with Gordon McIntyre Kemp. It was last year, I think, was earlier. But, he had this idea.
Citizens Convention, and it was based on the Welsh model. They took 2 years.
Frankly, we were kind of astonished that setup that they had in Wales included asking the question and pursuing, the whole scenario of Wales being independent. Because I thought, well, no way would Holyrood have set that up. I mean, especially in Wales, given it was done with the help of the Welsh Labour Party. So Gordon kind of picked up, well, I don't know if he picked up on that, or maybe he had the idea independently, but he knew about the Welsh setup. And basically what he was talking about is what you've just said. You go to a wee place somewhere in Scotland and there's always church halls and there's always places where you can have a meeting. Even you just go into the pub and have a chat with people. But, you set things up that you get small things happening, but lots of them with folk who know what they're talking about, but also can are just ordinary in a certain way and can make connections with,
but Marlene,
with other people.
Ordinary people can just learn a bit about something.
Yeah.
So even if it was being down the pub talking about the energy landscape in Scotland and how we are handicapped, and how, frankly, GB Energy, no matter what handful of jobs they put in Aberdeen, is actually just about taking Scottish energy south.
Yeah.
So, people could find out about one thing and always have it in their pocket, whether they're talking to family, friends, neighbours, work colleagues, whatever. Or they may have somebody that they know who might be a little bit open to be persuaded. And then it's a matter of dropping one pebble at a time. You don't pin them down with their pint and talk at them for an hour. That's what I do in church halls. And then we have another, 45 minutes of Q&A. But different people have different skills. And so whatever it is that you can do to inform yourself, to have good conversations with the people around you, as you say, lots of small things all add up together. But equally, I mean, I'm obviously also doing a lot of talks on Gaza, as you can imagine. And so I'm doing quite a few double headers. I was in Galashiels last weekend, giving a talk about Gaza on Friday and a talk about the wellbeing economy on the Saturday. I'm in Lochaber at the end of this month. I'm in Musselburgh talking about wellbeing economy. I'll be in Oban. And I'm open to people just getting in touch with me. If you can get together, not just SNP branches. I mean, there's over 200 of them. That's one a week for 4 years. Sorry, that's a waste of my time.
Yeah.
But if you get multiple branches and different yes groups and Women for Indy and others, and make it a public meeting and organise me a church hall, I'll be there. And my poor hubby Hans will drive me.
Holding your handbag.
Because that's what I can do. And what I enjoy to do is to unpack that. I mean, I totally agree that there are aspects of the wellbeing economy that the Scottish government could unpack in leaflets, definitely could unpack, as you say, in little videos and so on. Whether they'll take that up, I don't know. But to me, discussing this on the route to 2026 is vital because, as I say, it both highlights the job they have done with devolution since 2007 and the potential of independence. And despite what you hear back from the opposition, Scotland failing on health, failing on education, failing on crime, it is nonsense. They throw the attainment gap. The attainment gap at national fives in Scotland has been halved. The attainment gap at higher level has been cut by 2/3. That is huge progress. And yet what we hear, Scottish education is going to the dogs. Yeah. The NHS, all 4 health services are on their knees since the pandemic. but the Scottish Health Service is still outperforming the other three. And when then people go, oh, that's whataboutery. I'm sorry, you're fighting an election where you aim to be the government of Scotland and you make all these promises. Let's never mind the promises you're making. If you're Tory, you've been in charge in England for 14 years. If you're Labour, you've been in charge in Wales for decades. So let's look at what you've actually done rather than what you claim you might do without explaining how you do it. So to me, that comparison of the three nations in Great Britain that have been ruled by SNP, Labour and Tory is quite critical to fighting the campaign until next year. Yeah. Instead of just reeling back on the ropes and accepting that, oh, the Scottish government record's terrible. No, it's not. Get up there and defend it. Yeah. And show the innovative things. The Scottish public have no idea that people elsewhere are paying tuition fees, paying the bedroom tax, etc., because it doesn't get covered in the media. So we have to go out and tell them that, but then talk about these underlying issues of an obsession with growth, an obsession with GDP growth, which is frankly destructive and isn't coming to you and I. It's actually going to billionaires. It's going offshore. It's not helping anybody.
The mainstream media, I mean, I think it applies to the whole of the UK, but it certainly applies in Scotland. There's never a context. So reporting Scotland or cringing Scotland is what we call it in our house. You know, they'll have a headline or they'll have an item about something. Now, it's not wrong. It's not that they've made it up, but it's never put in context. I sit and shout at the TV and my husband goes, shall I just change channel then? You know, because let's not do that. How's your blood pressure kind of thing. So, you know, that would be fantastic to be able to do that, to make those, to put things in context and make comparisons. I mean, I knew you were giving talks, but I didn't quite realise the extent to which you're doing that. But it's fantastic because it strikes me that somehow or other over the next, 10 months, something like that? Maybe less. You know, we need to do something about getting a momentum going. Now, maybe it'll not be the kind of momentum that they had in the run-up to 2014 or even, you know, the year after, which must have been the year you got elected, right, when there was all that, you know, there was a general election and there was incredible sense of momentum. So to get back to that seems to me to be, you know, what we need to do, because otherwise, if people stay feeling, saying, oh, you know, ScotGov don't do anything, blah, 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 the kind of nonsense that gets said, which is wrong, but I can sympathise with the feeling that's underneath it. But if we don't fill that gap, Nigel Farage will fill it. Well, that's what he does.
I mean, these narratives are being promoted, and the other narrative, which has been going on much longer, which I think is incredibly dangerous, is all politicians are the same, all politicians are rubbish, because that actually promotes voter disengagement. There's no point in voting. They're all rubbish. You might as well not bother. And actually, one of the biggest risks in any of our future elections is poor voter turnout, because you can bet your bottom dollar Farage will get his people out and you will get more extreme groups coming through. And that's obvious whenever turnout goes down. So I think we do need that kind of energy. I mean, Hans and I did 5,500 miles in 2014. I'm not saying that we're going to quite manage that. We're a good decade older and a bit kind of frayed around the edges now. But it's trying to get people talking. And obviously, hopefully, podcasts like this, putting this out, sharing it, getting people talking about it is the best that all of us can do to try and amplify things, but trying to get that buzz, and particularly to make sure people get out of their sofa and go and vote next May, because that is absolutely vital. But I think bringing the movement back together is really important, and that's why when I am invited somewhere, I say, look, I want you to reach out to the other local parties, Greens, Socialists, and the Yes groups. Try and bring people into the same room, and then let's have this discussion about a vision for Scotland that would really benefit every single person who lives here.
Yeah, the reform and Corbyn, I think, being able to position themselves as the anti-establishment outsider almost underdog, but stir up a lot of anger. I get the sense that particularly Reform is doing that a lot, as you're saying, face-to-face, in small groups, going out to places and enthusing people with a message that we would find horrifying. But if it taps into their anger about their situation and promises a magic solution, we saw that it worked for Trump. We can see the results that Farage is having. So somehow linking the positive messages about independence and all the benefits that we've got under those wellbeing possibles, I think is absolutely crucial, because it's the only way to deflect that anger is to say, but we actually are doing something better and it can get even better. Where the real radical option is independence, not
yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the impact on Scotland of Brexit, of the Internal Market Act, of the undermining of devolution. We can't even have a waste recycling system, a deposit return scheme. Just this determination to keep blocking Scottish democracy and the threat of Farage. And yes, I can understand there are people who, someone is coming up going, they're all rubbish, give us a chance because we'll change everything and we'll make it better. But, you actually have to look at what they've said they will do. We know Farage supports an American-style health system. Have a look at what that would cost you and your family. Never mind free prescriptions. You're talking about paying for hospital admissions. Have a look at what attacking human rights means. Yes, you may think, we get rid of the European Convention on Human Rights and we can kick some people out that I've been told are the cause of all of this. But what does it do to your human rights as a disabled person, as a woman, as, someone of an ethnic background, if your human rights are also no longer protected? What kind of pariah state does the UK turn into if we extract ourselves from, the Refugee Convention and, various international law pillars? Basically, Reform might like the idea of Fortress Britain, but actually, I don't think most people would really want to live in that. To highlight what his policies actually are, because he won't tell people. He'll keep it really simple. Here's an anti-establishment vote. This equals none of the above. You want change. Of course, people want change. But the genuine change that could deliver improvement for people who are struggling is to have the full powers, both financial, fiscal, and political, to say, this is the Scotland we want to build. And it's totally different from the direction in Westminster, where billionaires have been able to lobby, arms firms have been able to lobby and directly influence policy. Private health companies have been able to lobby and are setting the direction for the NHS in England. That is not the Scotland we want. So that's why vision is important.
Yeah, the fossil fuel industry is apparently a major donor of Farage as well. So that's what you're getting.
In Glasgow last week, there was a absolute great example of Farage applying, it's Trump and Steve Bannon's playbook. So, they've had people putting saltires on flags, particularly up in Maryhill, and I think it also happened in part of Edinburgh. A friend of mine, she lives up Maryhill, and she said to me, I got off the bus and it was great. There were saltires everywhere. What happened? I went, well, unfortunately, that was the right-wing Faragists. And at the same time as that was happening, just the same few days, Farage did this speech with a whole set of completely rubbish statistics about how Glasgow was taking in a far higher proportion of asylum seekers, and it was impacting people not being able to get housing, blah, blah, blah. It was all wrong. I heard it and I just felt sickened, actually. I just thought, that is sickening that Trump's playbook is now happening right here in Glasgow. And it's so cynical, isn't it, of doing that as a way to, they will win seats for Holyrood. Clearly they will because of the voting system, but hopefully we can keep that to a minimum. Quite close to me is Knightswood Shopping Centre, so there was right-wing anti-Muslim graffiti appearing. It's a very diverse community around about Knightswood, so some people must have walked past that and thought, well, that's talking about me, and then how do you feel? Presumably you feel, you can't help yourself but feel on edge or even frightened.
obviously, the protests outside the hotels and so on, we have no idea whether these were people from Scotland or whether they were people who had been brought up, organised by Reform and brought up to Scotland. We don't know that. We do know that Reform has support in Scotland, so they may well have managed to gather enough activists. But I mean, some of what we saw, the hatred, kill them all, etc.
Oh yes, horrible.
Was just utterly vile. And I think that we need to make sure that we stand up for Scotland being a welcoming and inclusive society. I think we are lucky that we have a government, and it starts at the top, who do not blame immigrants for issues, because what we've seen is the Tories chasing Reform and setting their stall on Reform territory. Well, frankly, all you're doing is actually vindicating Farage. And we see Labour doing the same thing. Yeah. And I was a wee bit disappointed even in some of the Alba statements, still adding in, the challenges of public services and housing due to immigration. It's not due to immigration. Immigrants are a tiny proportion of our society. To blame all of the ills of our NHS on immigration. How many staff, as I said before, in social care, there were parts of the Highlands just before Brexit where 30% of social care workers were EU citizens. My husband, who's German, worked as a GP here for decades. Immigrants actually look after us, whether they're building homes, working in our public services. So we're at least lucky that we have a government that sets that tone. But what we've seen at a UK level is the Tories and Labour chasing Reform. And we're getting the same with the Scottish Tories, with Russell Finlay starting the same language. And I think one of the dangers is the unionist parties will be glad to see the saltire being used in this Raise the Flags campaign, because they think it will intimidate us to no longer be able to use the saltire. And we absolutely need to stand against that.
Somebody put a comment saying, so why is the council taking down saltires in Glasgow, but we've got them, which is the good saltire, which is the bad saltire? I thought, actually, maybe they shouldn't have taken them down in Glasgow if there's no association. The fact that it's been put up by somebody, they haven't put their name on it. Why don't we claim it back? But it's an interesting one.
After that happened last week, and an acquaintance of mine put a notice up on it's a local Yes group WhatsApp. I'm going up to Knightswood Shopping Centre. I've got a friend going with me. We're taking a table. We've got leaflets from Stand Up to Racism Scotland group. Anyone who wants to come, please come. So I thought, well, I'll just go up. And it was like an hour at lunchtime. People respond. Once you said what it was for, they were gathering signatures on a petition to say that they didn't want this to happen. And I think it's going to Glasgow Council. But it was very positive. Most people said, oh yeah, I'll sign that. That was dreadful. And so I came away heartened, actually. And it was a bit like what we've been kind of saying. It was just a wee thing. 3 women, including me. And then another woman from the same WhatsApp group appeared, and then the chap who's going to be the candidate for the Holyrood constituency came up. He came and joined us. So it was just like WhatsApp, 5 people, and maybe 50 signatures were gathered. And it is just a small thing, but that's what you need, isn't it? Just another one and another one and another one.
I think it's important to actually share, take photographs of that, put it on social media, share it and help to empower other people. If there's 2 of you and a picnic table with your saltire and your petition or your leaflet or whatever, just get on with it. Like we used to have at Brexit voting boards where people could put coloured dots on things. People will come up and say, what's this about? And it gives you a chance to engage with people. And that's what all of us need to do. And it doesn't matter what way it is, whatever way you and your pal might feel comfortable doing, or you and your own, or you and a whole group, is just to get out and do it. But we mustn't allow the saltire to be hijacked. I mean, I saw there were some outside the Scottish Parliament where it was a saltire, but then they had something stuck on it that was, send them back or deport them.
There was only tiny numbers. There was 3 saltires and somebody wearing one. And I mean, we got their mass deportation now, stop the boats. So they're the people saying they're going to protect our women. No, thank you.
They don't give a toss about women. They will jump on whatever bandwagon. And we had it in the House of Commons. Yes, what happened in Rotherham was appalling, the grooming gangs. But this narrative that they keep coming back to, despite all the evidence of, oh, yes, it's Muslim men who abuse the most young women in the UK. That's absolute nonsense. The biggest group of abusers are young white men. So, don't allow them to get away with absolutely talking rubbish and using that to stir up hate. I was never prouder of Nicola Sturgeon than the morning after the Brexit referendum, when the first people she spoke to were European citizens like my husband, saying, I'm sorry about this vote, we want you to stay. Whether it's Kenmure Street or Refugee or getting out and saying refugees welcome here, or what you just described, we need to be clear what kind of Scotland we are and what kind of Scotland we really want to become.
Yeah, indeed. And that wee hour up at Knightswood, I did do a little video on just using my phone, stuck it on our TikTok, and it's had about 1,000 views. So it's worth it. It gets around.
And there was a couple of other protests on in Edinburgh. It was buzzing. The centre was buzzing. But two of them related to Palestine and Gaza, which I thought might be nice just to touch on. This was a silent protest outside Queen Elizabeth House, or Colonial Headquarters, as we refer to it. And this was really interesting because there was a parallel one in London, which the police tactics there were, I don't know if you've seen pictures, they were screaming at each other, they were dragging them out. This one was very different. I mean, there were police there, obviously. There was camera police there as well with the orange hats on, and they had a drone, so it was scrutinised. But it was a really very dignified, respectful event and well attended. There was a bell rang, and they fell silent. They wrote, that they opposed genocide on their signs. They held them up. They're wearing the Palestine Needs Action T-shirts. It went on for about half an hour. And then the march arrived, which was Stop the War. And that just came storming down the high street completely, and they joined in the silent vigil quietly, and then they carried on. It was just, the energy was fabulous, and that was very well supported as well.
I read about it. As you know, I was originally going to be speaking at the All Under One Banner March, but because of some health issues, but I had to withdraw from that, because otherwise I would have been trying to finagle it so that I could do both. No, I mean, I really admire the people, and I admire the people in London who knew they would be treated as appallingly as that. I'm glad to see that Police Scotland have moved on, because we were having, maybe not on the same scale, but we were having stories of people being arrested for basically just supporting Palestine and Palestinian rights. And I was really glad to see Humza write to the Procurator Fiscal's office and say, come on, we need to do something different, because the proscription of Palestine action is absolute nonsense and ridiculous, and is calling the law basically into disrepute completely. Now, I would not necessarily have been somebody throwing paint at planes or throwing paint at businesses or whatever. So it's not that I would have supported what they do, but the idea of proscribing them as terrorists is an utter misuse of terrorism law and is reducing people's right to free speech and to protest in whatever way they choose to protest. And of course, what we then saw, it was actually migrating, so that if you were standing chanting Free Gaza or Free Palestine, you were having people who were being lifted. So I was really glad to see that contrast between Police Scotland and what was happening with the Met, which, as you say, was appalling. Watching them dragging away an 83-year-old minister, watching them dragging away the blind chap in his wheelchair. I mean, come on. What ridiculous. This makes you look like? It makes the law an ass, and a cruel ass at that. Yeah. What we don't know, because obviously I did see in the papers that there have been a couple of people arrested in Edinburgh in relation to the Terrorism Act, one in their 60s, one in their early 80s. So what I don't know is, did the police make a decision to not go in and manhandle people, But as you say, it was all filmed. And are they now going to start arresting people?
Yeah,
Now,
that's what they did. The last Gaza protest it was over the following weekend, the following couple of days.
So we may see that.
Yeah.
We have seen that the Lord Advocate has cancelled court dates, has cancelled bail conditions. But what they have not said is, oh, Scotland's going to do something different. What they are saying is, this is the criminal law, but what we will do is have a special procurator who will look into it all. I would like to see them go further. I have to say,
another fight they could pick, isn't it?
Exactly. Because it's ridiculous. It's more than ridiculous. It's appalling. So I think it's great the people who have been willing to do it, particularly in London, where they know they are going to be dragged and hit and thrown into vans and all the rest of it. I think I'm full of admiration for what they've done, but I would like Scotland to be taking an even stronger, different reaction. I'm glad of the change in Police Scotland. I'm glad of the change the Lord Advocate has announced, but I think we should be standing up for, frankly, what's right. And what's right is freedom of speech, freedom to protest, and to fight against the actual proscription of Palestine action, because I don't think it'll stand. I think it'll eventually fall in the courts because it's nonsense. And therefore, I'd quite like to see Scotland get ahead of that curve and say,
exactly.
We're not doing this.
That's another one where you would take people with you, because I think that is the general mood.
With what we're watching in Gaza, I mean, as you know, my involvement, that I used to live there and was involved in setting up the breast cancer project and so on. I mean, I met before Christmas, as I think I said when we talked in February, and there was only one person remaining from our original breast cancer team. In March, so after I spoke to you, the night that Israel broke the ceasefire, they killed one of my best friends from Gaza and her eldest daughter. So she survived 15 months of war and was killed through a supposed ceasefire. And it just goes on and on and on. So the idea that people who are sitting quietly protesting against a genocide are terrorists, in contrast to what we are watching. We all have a duty to speak up against what's happening in Gaza. And every government has a duty. I mean, I was glad to see the decisions the Scottish government made this week. I was glad to see the vote in Holyrood. I'm quite proud of that. Obviously, you want to see the action that comes from it.
Yeah.
But all of us will have to answer, whether to our children, our grandchildren, ourselves, our own consciences, what did you do? How did you try to combat the suffering that's happening in Gaza at the moment? And the idea of police dragging elderly protesters away, it's just so shocking.
You feel this sense of energy building, that there's something that people are just, certainly in Edinburgh, on a Saturday afternoon going, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that, I'll have some of that. And we were all out there. And it was
that's what we had in 2014, as people said, the discussions in the pubs were about politics and not about football, and
exactly.
In 2014, my experience of 2014 was it was a festival of politics, and it even ran in through the election in 2015. The energy was incredible, and it's trying to get that energy back, because unless we can get that positivity and energy, then we are in danger of apathy, negativity, and that's when the extremists actually get their chance to take over.
There's one thing, Philippa, you're obviously doing more than your bit, probably a couple of dozen people's bits, kind of going around doing those talks, and it's really great to hear that. And I bet there's a lot of people in Scotland who go out of those halls and with something to think about, which is the main thing, isn't it? You give people something. I
mean, I enjoy doing the talks, but I really enjoy the Q&A, the kind of interaction. I mean, I'm always a bit knackered afterwards, but that engagement is really positive. And I'd be totally happy if people have a local group that they would like me to come and they think they could organize an event. My email is very simple. It's just philippa@whitford.scot, 1 L and 2 P's in Philippa. And if they can pull their Yes groups or their Palestine groups or whatever together, I'm quite happy to come and try and have these discussions. But as I say, these discussions are actually for all of us, every single one of us. If you believe in independence, You shouldn't just be bitching on social media. You should be actually trying to reach out to those who are not yet convinced. That's the duty for every single one of us.
Yeah, hear.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, as ever, what a pleasure. The hour goes in no time when we're chatting to you. And I think we've covered a whole load of very important topics there. So thank you very much for your time as ever. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. It's lovely to see you both again.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.